Welcome to How to Write Good. I am your host, Daniel Poppy. You can find out more about me at danielpoppy.com. Poppy is spelled Poppie if you want to check that out. You can check out my book, The Ninth Hour. It is a epic fantasy adventure novel, the beginning of a series without magic, so check that out. Or you can check out One Last Toast for Ebenezer Fleet. That is a crime thriller. Both are set in alternate histories, I guess. They're not alternative history novels, though, if that makes sense. If you know that genre, you understand what that means. If you don't know that genre, it's probably best to just label it all as adventure or fantasy, something along those lines. So check those out again, danielpoppy.com. danielpoppy.com. I hope that my light source is all right. Let's see how this looks. I hope my light source is all right. It is a little later in the evening, so I don't have a super... Usually I do this in the middle of the day, so I don't have to worry about the lighting, but right now it is getting a little darker. So if it does get a little darker, it's because it's dark outside. So just FYI for everybody. Is there anything else? We are going to jump into the word of the week. The word of the week is pedant. It's a person making an excessive display of knowledge. You probably don't hear it as a noun, pedant or pedant, or however you want to say it. You probably hear pedantic usually. You don't usually hear it used in the noun way. Again, it's a person making an excessive display of knowledge. Pedantic would be an adjective, so it is describing a noun. So you're saying, you are being pedantic, which you're showing an excessive display of knowledge. But if you're saying you're a pedant, then you're just saying this is a person doing that. So that's a good word to know. At the very least, you should know it when it comes up when people bring it up. Usually it's brought, I don't know, lots of big words are used in politics because people in politics think that big words make you intelligent. So you'll hear that in relation to politics. You'll hear that in probably academia as well. Just saying it as academia is a academic thing to do, where you're saying, you're in academia, you're in the academy. It's something you say when you're really, 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 really smart, right? Because if you use the words in a specific way, people assume different things about you, which can be to your advantage. So just be aware of that. If there's a specific way of using words or a specific way of saying words, and you're not saying them in that way, people will assume certain things about you. It doesn't really matter if you're outside of that normal, like what is considered an intelligent way of speaking, right? So if you have some sort of, this is why people assume that when you learn a different language, you're not as intelligent as you are, because you say words in a different way. So there's an assumption made about you because you're not actually using the words how they understand the words are meant to be used. Sorry for my flickering light. And because of that, they think, you're not as smart. If my light flickers, I'm sorry about that. The reason why my light is flickering is because the outlet that it's in is the worst outlet in the world. I'm telling you, the worst outlet that has ever existed is that one. Besides that, I guess we'll move on. We are going to be talking about how the right words do not exist. And this is an idea that I think you should consider, right? Don't take this as gospel truth. You should probably not take most things that I say as gospel truth, and you should probably not take most things people say as gospel truth, as absolutely true, right? You should really dig into it to find what is absolutely true. But this is one of those things where right now I am thinking about this. I don't know exactly. I think this is correct, but there is some, not misgivings, but there's a little bit of doubt in my mind, just a little, not too much. I do think this is correct, but there's a little doubt in my mind that this is incorrect. So I'm not completely sure, right? Most of the time I'm very most of the time I'm very confident in not competent at all. Most of the time I'm confident in what I'm saying. But this is one of the things where it's more of like a thought experiment type thing where I'm playing around with the idea and I'm still pushing forward and trying to see whether this is true. And this is, in the past, I've talked about this idea, how writing is trying to find the right words. I've used those words, or I've used words similarly, or I've said something that presented that idea in that way. And I've been thinking about it, and I think that it might not be the case that you can do that. And I think that some people, not me, because I write perfectly, right? But no, some people, and I would say myself included, walk into writing, we start writing, and we are not finding words that seem to fit what we're trying to say. And if you are a writer, if you're someone who is, typically it's the case when somebody walks up to you and they talk at you as if they know like if somebody talks to you as if they know everything, and if you run into a writer who thinks they know everything, not that we know anybody like that, right? Not that there aren't people with podcasts that are like that at all. But you run into people who think they know everything, and you're bound to run into writers who think they know everything. And sometimes maybe they don't think they know everything, but they come across as if they do know everything. And they might give you advice on writing. They might say, well, you're just trying to find the right words. And I've talked about that in the past of, hey, you're trying to find the right words, where I say you're trying to find the best words, which is essentially saying you're trying to find the right words, because the best words are the right words. But if somebody comes up to you and says that, and says, this is how you write, this is what good writing is, which, I mean, I'm probably guilty of that, of saying that in a very confident way, as if I know what I'm talking about. But if somebody says that to you in that way, then it comes across, like they come across as if they know everything, and somebody might actually say, oh yeah, this is how it is, this is what writing is. I always get frustrated, and this I'm certainly certain this comes across in this podcast. I always get frustrated when people have extremely they have these ideas about writing, and these are the ideas about writing. These are the rules that you must follow with writing. And people who are very obsessed with grammar, I know people who really like grammar and who will correct grammar. I have a friend who likes correcting people's grammar online. It's just his thing. But or he used to. I don't know if he does it anymore. But people who are like, this is how grammar has been presented in English. These are the rules of grammar, and you must follow every single rule of grammar. Otherwise, you're a bad writer. One thing I'd point out to them is that when I don't end certain sentences, when I don't end them in a preposition, it sounds funky. If I'm saying, oh, this is the tool with which I'm going to hit that person, it doesn't sound as natural as I'm going to hit him. This is the tool I'm going to hit him with, right? It doesn't sound as natural. It's thicker in my mouth. It doesn't come out as easily. It doesn't come out as naturally. I'm more likely to say, this is the tool I'm going to hit him with, than this is the tool with which I'm going to hit him. It's just, it puts something, it doesn't flow the correct way. And that's something that we run into in older. I think that it's shifting, right? But even if you're in an English class, you might still run into that with a grammar teacher, with an English teacher who's saying, you don't end a sentence with a preposition, when in fact, English has many cases in which you end a sentence with a preposition. But you might run into those people who are hard and fast on their rules for writing. They might decide, the White Instructs, what's it called? I can't remember, the little book. I don't remember what it's called. There's this little handbook for writing, handbook for writers, or something like that. And some people go off of that and they say that's how you write. And that used to be the case, that was the definitive way in which you were supposed to write. You use White Instructs little handbook. It's not too long. You keep it with you. You follow these little idiosyncrasies that Struck decided were good to do or not do in writing, and that's how you do it. But that was about 100 years ago, I believe. If it hasn't been 100 years, it's closing in on 100 years soon. And the world of writing and the world of language has changed in English. You're not going to use Shakespearean. You're not going to use Middle English, which is Shakespearean English. You're not going to use those rules and apply it to writing today. It's just changed. So when somebody comes across to you, and maybe it was me in the past, and they say, oh, You need to find the right words. All you're doing for writing is finding the right words. And they present that as if that is the way you're supposed to write. Well, first of all, that doesn't give you much to work with. I know that I give you very little to work with in this podcast in terms of writing, but it doesn't give you much to work with if they're trying to teach you how to write. But maybe it's the case, and you can consider this, and I certainly might be wrong with this, but maybe it's the case that the right words don't exist. Maybe it's the case that the right words do not exist. And maybe some of you are thinking, if the right words don't exist, that alleviates some tension because I don't have to be absolutely perfect. I guess there's been a theme in my podcast recently about being perfect, and you're not seeking perfection, you're seeking to grow. But let's go back to this idea of the right words not existing. So when we approach writing, we want to make something good. I don't know any writer. There's probably some writer out there who's like, I want to make something trash. I want to make something so bad. I want to make something awful. But when we approach writing, the end goal of writing is to make something good, or is to make something good in some sense of the word good, right? So you might have a sentence that's completely butchered in terms of what is how the English language is supposed to come across, like I talk. So, and that sentence might be butchered, but at the same time, you're not going for a perfectly grammatical or a sentence that means something that has its meaning come across perfectly. Maybe you're going for humor, which is often the case when you butcher certain things in sentences, or you're trying to present how a specific person talks, like a string of dialogue, right? A few lines of dialogue, and the dialogue is horrible, a horrible construction, but it represents how that person talks really well. But in the end, whether it's because of humor, whether it's because of clarity, whether it's because of the beauty of the English language, etc., we're trying to make something that is good. We want to write, I don't know if we want to write beautiful things, but we want to write in a way that hits it hits a certain bar in a certain area. It hits a certain mark in a certain area, or it gets close enough to that mark to be understood in that way. I initially wrote, we want to write something beautiful, but it's not necessarily the case that we want to write something beautiful, right? Unless you redefine beauty, but I just don't want to redefine beauty because we don't know. We already have a definition of beauty. We understand what beauty is when we see it, of course. And to say that everything is beautiful pretty much everything I've seen has beauty, but not everything is beautiful. Does that make sense? Not everything is beautiful, but almost everything I've seen in my life has some sort of beauty in it, which is really cool. But yeah, so Michelangelo had this idea of, he's like, yeah, I'm paraphrasing, of course, this isn't how he talked, but he's like, yeah, I've got this block of marble and I'm not carving something out of this block of marble. I'm just freeing something from this block of marble that's already in there. And this perspective is that in the block of marble he used, the statues were already within the block of marble he used, and he just had to chip away until he released those statues from that block of marble. This idea is the idea of having the right words, right? This idea is like having a muse. And I think I've talked about it in the past that if you work off of a muse, maybe I haven't though. If you work off this idea of having a muse, you are going to be waiting for the muse, and you're probably going to function in a weird. You might end up functioning in a weird way where you get up at really bizarre times. Like, I suddenly have a burst of inspiration, and you're basing your writing and basing how you do things. You're basing your daily activities, your daily writing activities at the very least, off of having a muse. And I think that's kind of this idea that was pushed forward with Michelangelo, or that he pushed forward. Sorry, my leg itches a little bit. That he pushed forward with this idea of the statues already being in the blocks. So I think that this is actually this isn't what we're trying to go for. And maybe there's been this idea in art in general, right? Maybe there's been this idea in art, literature. I'm moving away from calling everything art. I'm not sure if we should do that. I'm not sure if we should call absolutely everything art. Maybe we should call literature. Maybe we should call music. Maybe instead of calling it art, maybe we should call these specific areas, that thing, because it's more specific, and art, as it's usually been understood, is I guess there's a lot of things that fall under art, such as painting, sculpture, different things like that. I don't know. So should we call all those things art? But that's beside the point. But this has this idea of the muse, right? You think you have you're like, I'm just waiting to feel inspired by what I'm doing. And I think that any author over the age of 30, unless you're a particularly unique person, or at least a lot of authors over the age of 30 are probably going to tell you, that muse doesn't show up as much. At least that's what it seems like. It seems to be the case for me. I don't have that feeling of inspiration I used to. And one of the reasons I don't have that feeling of inspiration I used to in the same way is because I just don't have as much energy. I'm not extremely old, but I'm just, you're trying to figure things out. You're trying to put stuff together in your life. It takes a lot of energy. You're under a lot of stress. As you get older, more stress is added on. More things go on in your life. You have kids. You just don't have as much time to dedicate toward leisure activities. And if you approach writing as something you're only going to do when you're inspired, you're approaching it as a leisure activity. And when you hit a certain age, unless you don't have kids, unless you don't have other responsibilities, because some people might not, you might be what my friend of mine calls a dink, right? Double income, no kids. You might be one of them, and you might have a lot of free time. And you might be like, I have a lot of free time. Why don't you? Well, most people have children, and it's your own choice not to. And I think that. But most people have children, so I'm talking to what most people are going to do. So you're in a different category than those people. But most people have children. Most people have responsibilities. Most people get to the point in their life where they just suddenly get tired, right? You see people who are football stars. They're sports stars in high school, or they're in really good shape in high school, and they're doing all these things. They're in sports. They're very active, or different things like that. You look at them 15 years later, and they've gotten fat. And one of the reasons why people get fat is just you get busy. You get busy. You have more stress, more responsibilities, and certain things fall by the wayside just because it takes more energy to do that. Not saying that you should give up on certain things, but I understand it more as I've gotten older. But yeah, if you are trying to base your writing off of inspiration or the muse, whatever you want to call it, it's not going to be helpful. It's in the end, I don't think it's going to help you. If you base your writing off of habit, then you're going to be able to write a lot more frequently. You're going to be doing a lot more writing. You're going to be a lot more productive. In the past, it's one of my writing rules. Your first draft is trash, right? You should enjoy that crappy first draft. Enjoy your crappy first draft, because if you enjoy that crappy first draft and you enjoy the fact that it is a piece of trash, you're going to get more first drafts done. And if you get more first drafts written, you're going to get more edits done, second drafts, third drafts, final drafts. You're going to send more stuff out to agents if you decide to go that way. You're going to publish more stuff, etc. And the reason why you're actually going to get better. And one of the reasons why you're getting better is because you're practicing more. But yeah, the goal with this inspiration, when you approach it from this inspirational perspective, when you approach it from this perspective that you have a muse and this muse is going to give you the right words, you're going to be inspired and you're going to find the right words, right? They're somewhere out there in the ether. You're going to find these right words, and that's your goal. The goal is the right words. The goal is the best words. And like I said before, I've echoed this sentiment that you're trying to look for the best words or the right words. But the question is, what if the right words don't exist? Because if we are telling ourselves that if we're looking for the right words and there's not anything that would be considered the right words, then we're going to keep on looking for the right words until we never find them. And this goes back to, I hear writers that are like, yeah, I worked on my book. I kept on working on it for a couple of years. They're definitely patient. I can give them that. But they say, I worked on that, and then I kind of got my book done, but I kept on moving around a comma. Well, first I wonder, how do you have enough time to actually worry about I think you should worry about how things are put together in your book, right? And how things come across. But I don't have the time to keep on switching around commas. Some people might, and that might be how you work. Good for you. But honestly, I've got to get stuff out. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. You only have a certain amount of time in your life. And if you want to do a significant amount of writing, you got to get your butt in gear to do that significant amount of writing. So when I do the writing, people say, oh yeah, I've switched around a comma and I've been working on this for the past 6 months and that's kind of all I've done, yada, yada, yada. And that's actually an older idea in writing. And the reason why people did that is because what happened is they went through the traditional publishing process where they got an agent, they were trying to get an agent. So they kept on sending stuff out to people. And I think it was a vicious cycle because they kept on sending things out. They probably were working on more books, but they kept on trying to improve and improve and improve this book, which I mean is noble to a certain degree. But at some time you have to say, you know what, I've done my best, and maybe those right words aren't going to come because those right words for this book do not exist. And when I say that the right words don't exist, is people think that, like I said, I've echoed this sentiment before, but people say, I'm trying to look for these words. I'm trying to look for the best words possible. But when I write, and when I do editing especially, I'm looking at the words I wrote, and in some cases I'm like, a lot of those are really good. And then I think, I could change these to something else. And what happens is I change it to something else. I'm like, I'm not sure. Both of those are essentially the exact same thing. Both of those they're just as valuable. They come across just as good as the other one. And maybe you could ask somebody about that. But what if every single person you ask says, I don't know, they sound pretty good to me. They come across in this way. They seem to mean the same thing, whatever. You have two words that are equal, right? And that's and what I'm talking about today is not to stress over these little tiny things. Like, writing is weird because it is a stress over little tiny things, right? In the end, you're stressing over what words you're using together to bring about a good flow in your book. And you're stressing over a lot of little things to bring about a bigger thing. So it seems like a contradiction. But the whole idea is that when you look at those little things, don't think, I'm looking for the best thing possible. If you found two really good things, it might be good to be like, I'm going to pick one of these and I'm going to go with it. I'm going to run with it. Maybe there's something better out there, but I could be looking my whole entire life for something better. And as I said in the past few podcasts, you can always write more books. You can always write more. For me, I hope to get about at least 100 books written in my life. And that's a lot of writing. And I'm sure my writing will change. I'm sure my writing will get better. But I'm not approaching it as if I'm writing every single book perfectly, because I can't write perfectly. And since I'm not writing every single book perfectly, I'm not looking for the best words, right? Because I don't know. Maybe they don't exactly exist. And maybe I'll find that is the case, that they do exist, right? Maybe I'll find that the best words actually do exist. Maybe I have access to that muse. Maybe I have access to the words. If I put them down on paper in this particular order about this particular topic, they are going to come across in the best way possible. It's going to be an all-time English classic, right? Not in other languages, just in English. If we took this attitude that the best words do not exist, I think it would actually free us up to be more creative. If you lock yourself into a specific way of doing things, if you have very extremely rigid rules, it does limit your creativity. I've said in the past, and this is true, that you do need boundaries for creativity. But maybe I should clarify, right? So you definitely need boundaries for creativity. So when you write in English is the boundary you're working in for creativity. English has rules per se. Those rules are changing because English is evolving every single day. We speak it and use it. Those rules are changing, but at the same time, those rules do act more as boundaries than, hey, you can't do this, you can't do that, right? There is a freedom in language. There's a freedom in using language. in the boundaries of language, there's a freedom in doing that just allows people to be more creative. So that maybe that's the approach we need to come at writing as. We're like, there's not this perfect thing we're looking for. There are boundaries we're working in, but we're free to experiment. We're free to try new things. And if we are free to try new things and experiment, I think that's where you're going to really strike on a lot of genius ideas. If we started to talk about, the right words do not exist, would we be able to talk about writing well? Because I think that might be an issue somebody might bring up with this. They're like, if the right words don't exist, if there isn't this top level standard of writing, how can we even talk about writing? Well, there is good writing and bad. That's clear. I think that everybody agrees there is good writing and bad. But when you approach something such as writing, or you approach something such as some other artistic endeavor, and I go back to this a lot, but I think it might be at the heart of what I think about writing. I think this is actually at the heart of my first rule for writing, if you want to call it a rule. My first rule, if you don't know what it is writing follows language. It means that writing is based on language. It means that language dictates what is good in writing, not the grammar as it's written down in grammar textbooks. The actual language determines whether something's good, not the English teacher or the grammarian. I think you say grammarian, a person who studies grammar. But within there are better pieces of writing in the English language, right? I could pull out a few different pieces of writing, and the easiest thing to do is you pull out a kid's piece of writing and you pull it on an adult's, right? If both of them have been writing. If you pull out an adult writer, and you pull out a kid who also likes writing, you're going to find that there is a significant difference in how the writing comes across. One writing flows a lot better. One writing allows you to forget about the author and just read. The other one gets in your way. The other one's clunky. It doesn't flow well. The constructions that are put together aren't good. The words that are used maybe don't fit how they're used. Maybe they're used incorrectly. Maybe it's not actually how English is used in general. Maybe the story isn't put together well. There isn't a good climax. There is not a good story arc. The character doesn't change, etc. Whatever. There's all these different things. But when we approach writing, the reason why I say that there's a hierarchy. There's definitely people who are better at writing than others. But at the same time, when you get among the best writers in the world, and if you start to read the best writers in the world, it becomes difficult to say who is the best. And the reason why it becomes difficult to say who is the best is because each writer is harnessing their own self in their writing. Each writer is harnessing their own cultural experience, their own linguistic experience, right? Each person is in a specific family. That family uses a specific nuance. There's specific idiosyncrasies in how that family uses language. That's what I'm trying to say. That person has a specific education in some area. Maybe that person has a specific experience in some area. What is the person trying to do in their writing? And when you get on to a really high level of writing, I think the reason why it's really hard to compare writer to writer on the top tier of writing is because these writers, they're not trying to find the best words, because they're not picking from, how would I say this? There's not one tree, right? Writing is an orchard. Take this and go with it, I guess. Writing is an orchard, right? Think about writing as an apple orchard. And in an apple orchard, there's not one tree. In an apple orchard, there are hundreds of trees, and there's probably dozens of different kinds. But writing is an even bigger orchard. And each writer is not picking. Writers don't pick from the same tree ever. Writers do not pick from the same tree ever. Writers are growing their own fruit tree. Writers are cultivating their own fruit tree, and that own fruit tree is their self and their own skill. And that tree is going to grow up in a specific way. It's going to look a specific way. It's going to feel a specific way. It's going to produce a specific kind of fruit that no other tree produces. It's going to have its own unique fruit. It might be similar to another tree's fruit, but it's going to be its own fruit. It's always going to be different. It's going to come across differently. And it's going to be an excellent fruit that's produced by that tree. So that's what the highest level writers are dealing with. They're not picking from the same tree. Lower level writers, people who are less experienced in writing, are picking from the same tree. But those high level those experts in writing, someone who you would say, these are some of the best writers in the world, they're hard to rank because it's almost comparing apples and oranges in some cases. People like different types of apples. And each type of apple has its own taste. Some apples are more similar. Some apples are sour. Some apples are sweet. Some apples are crisp. Some apples have a very thick skin. You Red Delicious, you disgusting you. They're not delicious, people. Red Delicious are not very good. But these writers have developed their skills so much that they're in a class of their own. There's this idea of niching down in writing, however you want to say that word, niching down, but I like niching better. Niching down in the writing is the idea that you find a specific corner of the market that you're going to decide to focus on. And typically it's picking a genre. But people who are extremely high-level writers, and they've been able to market themselves effectively, going back to having an experience in business, have experience in business, market yourself effectively. If you get to that level where you are one of the best writers in the world, you don't need to niche down, because I think you end up being your own niche. And that's the whole idea of these writers growing their own trees and producing a unique kind of fruit all their own. And that, I think, should be the goal of every single writer. It isn't an activity of finding the best words. It changes how you approach it. You're not trying to find the best words when you do that, because if that was the case, even a writer who had no experience could keep on looking until they found the right words. But if you approach it from this perspective, you're not trying to find the right words. You're trying to, for lack of a better term, create your best self. You're trying to grow into a person who is able to create that unique fruit. And maybe that's how we should approach art in general, because it makes a lot more sense to me. It makes so much more sense when you approach art that way, because you're not saying this artist is bad and this artist is good. They're just different. And it takes into account the uniqueness of each person. It takes into account how special each person is. And then instead of saying, this artist is good and this artist is bad, you could say, this artist is really good. This artist seems to have reached the peak ability of what this artist is capable of. This artist seems to have reached the peak ability of what he or she is capable of. And we can say that about authors as well. This author has reached the peak ability of their authorship. They have reached their peak potential, and they're excellent because of it. Congratulations, you got to the end of my podcast. So you either had to listen to my voice, or you had to listen to my voice and watch my face, which I don't envy you. Let's just say that. But if you're someone who likes this podcast and you're thinking, I'd like to support him in this podcast or the other creative things he's doing, creative things I'm doing, there's a few things you can do, because some people don't know what they can do to support people who create stuff. So these are the few things you can do that will really, really help me. First of all, check out my website. Check out the other things I'm doing. Second, comment on things, share them, like them, subscribe if you haven't already. And the third thing you can do is give reviews on different places. All right. So the biggest thing for this podcast is going on to iTunes, giving it an honest review, telling people why you like it, telling people why you hate my voice, why you hate my face, but telling people why they should really check it out, despite the fact that I have so many failings in terms of looks and voice. Other than that, if you want to check out my books, grab a copy of the book and listen to the serialized novel. Give digital copies away. That's a really big thing too. I always want to give you something that is valuable to you. I always want to give someone listening to this podcast something that's going to stick with them, or a book that they can actually own. And you can own that book for very, very cheap. So go check that out on Amazon. The different things I said: subscribe, upvote, comment, share, and definitely give it a review on iTunes. All right, as always, my name is Daniel Poppy, and this is How to Write Good.